Most people believe they know the woman who greets them with a warm smile every morning. For decades, Hoda Kotb has been the personification of sunshine on American television, a beacon of optimism and effortless joy. But behind the bright studio lights and the infectious laughter, a much quieter, more complex story was unfolding. While the world saw a woman who had everything figured out, Hoda was navigating a private reality that she kept carefully guarded from the public eye. It wasn't a scandal or a secret of malice, but a deeply personal journey of longing, silent battles, and a version of herself that didn't fit the perfect image on the screen. What does it cost to be the world's source of hope when your own heart is searching for something more? To understand the woman Hoda has become, we have to look at the life she lived when the cameras were finally turned off. Every morning at 10 a.m., millions of viewers tune in to find a friend. They find her in Hoda Kotb. To the public, Hoda is the ultimate glass-half-full personality, a woman whose laughter feels like a warm embrace and whose empathy seems bottomless. In the high-pressure world of broadcast journalism, where cynicism often reigns, Hoda built a 30-year career on the foundation of radical kindness. She became the person the audience turned to for comfort during national tragedies and for a much-needed glass of wine and a laugh at the end of the morning news cycle. She was the ultimate professional, a woman who had mastered the art of being on, projecting an image of total fulfillment and boundless energy. However, the psychological demand of maintaining this persona was immense. Beneath the surface of the morning star was a woman who had spent decades learning how to blend in. As the daughter of Egyptian immigrants growing up in Morgantown, West Virginia, and later New Orleans, Hoda learned early on that success often required a certain level of assimilation. In the early days of her journalism career, traversing small market stations in the South, she was frequently told she didn't fit the look or the sound of a traditional news anchor. To survive and thrive, she suppressed the parts of herself that felt too different, her heritage, her specific insecurities, and her deepest personal longings, to fit the mold of the objective, polished reporter. She became a master of emotional labor, providing a sense of stability for her viewers while her own private life remained largely a landscape of quiet solitude. By the time she reached the pinnacle of her career at NBC, Hoda had everything she had ever worked for: fame, respect, and a seat at the most coveted table in television. Yet, the irony was profound. She was a woman who was known by millions, a household name across the country, yet she was truly known by almost no one. She had constructed a beautiful, shimmering mask of professional success, but it was a mask that left very little room for the real Hoda to breathe. As Hoda reached the top of the mountain, she realized she was standing there alone. The applause was loud, but the silence in her private life was becoming deafening. She had spent 30 years building a life for the world to see, but a looming health crisis was about to strip away the mask she had worn so perfectly, forcing her to confront a reality she wasn't sure she was ready to face. In 2007, the vibrant trajectory of Hoda's career hit a wall that no one, not even her closest colleagues, saw coming. At the age of 42, Hoda was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was a diagnosis that threatened to shatter the very foundation of her public identity. When your professional brand is built on a foundation of unshakable happiness and optimism, how do you reconcile that with the visceral terror of a life-threatening illness? For Hoda, the answer was to retreat into a profound, disciplined silence. She chose not to make her battle a public spectacle or a segment on the morning news. Instead, she entered a period of intense psychological isolation, shielding the world from her vulnerability while she navigated the clinical coldness of hospitals and oncology wards. This decision created a literal double life that was as exhausting as it was courageous. By day, she was the glowing, charismatic host the audience relied on for their daily dose of cheer. She sat under the unforgiving heat of studio lights, wearing professional makeup that masked the pallor of her skin and the fatigue in her eyes. But as soon as the cameras cut to black, the mask would fall. By night, she was a patient fighting for her survival, enduring a grueling mastectomy and the subsequent rounds of treatment. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. She was a beacon of hope for millions of strangers, while she herself was drowning in uncertainty. This chapter of her life highlights a rare kind of resilience, a quiet, stoic strength, but it also underscores the heavy, psychological burden of carrying a secret of that magnitude. The physical toll was only part of the trauma. As Hoda looked in the mirror, she realized her body was changing in ways that felt permanent and grieving. The surgeries and the necessary hormonal treatments didn't just fight the cancer. They effectively closed a door she had always assumed would remain open. The traditional path to motherhood, the one society expects and the one she had silently hoped for, was vanishing before her eyes. The realization was a quiet, devastating blow. She had survived the disease, but the victory came with a profound sense of mourning for the future she had envisioned. Hoda eventually emerged from the shadow of the illness, having won the battle for her life. But the treatment had left her with more than just physical scars. It had left her with a permanent internal shift that changed the landscape of her future forever. She was a survivor, but she was also a woman carrying a deep, unvoiced loss. The question remained, would she ever be able to speak her truth to the millions who loved her, or would the secret of what she had lost stay buried beneath the smiles of the morning star? Following her recovery, Hoda returned to the spotlight with a renewed sense of purpose, but the double life she led began to take on a haunting new form. To the outside world, she was more successful than ever. Her career skyrocketed as she transitioned into the iconic fourth hour of the Today Show, where her chemistry with her co-host became the stuff of television legend. She was a household name, a viral sensation, and the woman everyone wanted to have a cocktail with. Yet, this professional peak coincided with a deep, psychological ache, the pain of delayed dreams that now felt permanently out of reach. While she was celebrating other people's milestones on air, Hoda was privately mourning the silent death of her own hope for a family. As she moved through her 40s and into her 50s, the contrast between her public and private worlds became a chasm. This was a season of life where many of her peers were navigating the complexities of raising teenagers or sending children off to college. Hoda, meanwhile, would leave the high-energy, celebratory atmosphere of the studio, filled with music, laughter, and 1,000 hellos, only to return every night to the crushing stillness of an empty apartment. This chapter of her life was defined by the quiet moments of reflection behind closed doors, where the glass-half-full philosophy was put to its ultimate test. We dive into the nuance of her internal dialogue, the nagging, intrusive thought that perhaps she had made a subconscious trade, sacrificing her personal fulfillment at the altar of professional safety and public service. She began to wonder if she had become a prisoner of her own persona. Was the happy Hoda the world loved the only version of herself she was allowed to reflect? The psychological toll of being a source of joy for others while harboring a deep, personal void is a heavy burden to carry. She questioned if her window for motherhood had slammed shut following her cancer battle, or if there was still a path through the dark. The stillness of her home served as a constant reminder of what was missing, creating a psychological tension that no amount of career accolades could soothe. She was a woman who had mastered the art of being present for everyone else, yet she was still searching for a way to be present for a family of her own. For years, Hoda remained in this state of suspended animation, balanced between gratitude for her survival and a quiet desperation for a different kind of life. She was waiting for a sign, any sign, that it wasn't too late to rewrite the ending of her story. That sign finally arrived in the form of a single phone call, one that would require her to step out of the shadows and risk her privacy, her reputation, and her heart one more time. For 30 years, Hoda Kotb had mastered the role of the giver. In every interview, every broadcast, and every friendship, she was the one providing the emotional support, the listening ear, and the steady hand. But a profound psychological shift occurs when a person who has spent a lifetime being the supporter finally admits they are the one with a deep, unfulfilled need. This chapter marks the transformative moment when Hoda decided to break her long-held silence. The double life she had maintained, the one where she was a successful, satisfied professional by day and a longing, childless woman by night, could no longer sustain the weight of her heart's desire. The turning point came not with a grand public announcement, but in a quiet, terrifyingly vulnerable conversation with her partner. Admitting at the age of 52 that she still desperately wanted to be a mother felt like a radical act of honesty. We explore the unique psychological tension of a woman in her fifth decade admitting to a young woman's dream. There is the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of being told no, and the internal struggle of feeling that she should simply be grateful for the life she already had. To ask for more felt like a risk to the carefully curated image of the woman who has it all. When she finally spoke the words aloud, the journey into the world of adoption began, a process shrouded in a different kind of secrecy. Unlike the high-stakes, predictable world of live television, the adoption process was a landscape of total uncertainty and the very real possibility of rejection. Hoda had to navigate a system where her fame offered no shortcuts and where her age was a factor she couldn't ignore. She was a titan of industry during the day, making executive decisions and leading a national broadcast. Yet in her private life, she was a woman waiting by the phone, hoping for a miracle that felt entirely out of her control. This chapter highlights the stark contrast between her public persona of ultimate confidence and the private reality of a woman who felt like a beginner again. She was learning that true power didn't come from her position at the anchor desk, but from the courage to be seen in her wanting. The paperwork was eventually filed, the background checks were completed, and a long, agonizing wait began. But as Hoda sat in the quiet of her home, she didn't yet realize that bringing a child into her life would do more than just fulfill a dream. It would mean she could no longer hide her true, messy, and beautiful self from the world. In early 2017, the carefully constructed wall between Hoda's public and private worlds reached a definitive breaking point. To the millions of viewers who tuned in every morning, Hoda's sudden and unexplained absence from the Today Show was a cause for genuine concern. In the age of social media, the vacuum was quickly filled with speculation. Fans worried that her cancer had returned or that she was facing a private family tragedy. But while the internet buzzed with rumors, Hoda was actually existing in a state of profound, silent bliss. She wasn't in a hospital or a boardroom. She was in a nursery, cradling a tiny baby girl named Haley Joy. This chapter captures the intense, almost surreal emotions of those first few days of motherhood experienced in total secrecy. After 30 years of living for the red light of the camera, Hoda found herself in a world where the only audience that mattered was a newborn. The psychological transition from Hoda the anchor to Hoda the mother was instantaneous and overwhelming. For the first time in her adult life, her career, the very thing she had nurtured and protected above all else, was no longer the center of her universe. The high-stakes world of national news felt like a distant memory compared to the rhythmic breathing of the child in her arms. There was a sacred beauty in those quiet, hidden moments, but they were also tinged with a unique kind of terror. Hoda was fiercely protective of this new reality. She feared that if the public found out too soon, the peace of their bonding would be shattered by the noise of the outside world. She lived in a bubble of diapers, lullabies, and soft light, finally experiencing the ordinary life she had envied for so long. Yet, as the days passed, the realization set in that she could no longer keep her two worlds separate. The joy was too big to be contained in a single apartment, and the double life she had mastered for decades was finally becoming unsustainable. She knew she had to return to the desk, but she also knew she couldn't return as the same person. She had to decide how to introduce this new, vulnerable version of herself to a world that thought they already knew everything about her. Hoda was finally ready to share her greatest joy, but a nagging fear remained. How would the public react to a 52-year-old woman starting over as a mother? Would they see it as a miracle, or would they see a woman who had waited too long? On a crisp February morning in 2017, The invisible barrier Hoda had maintained for 30 years finally dissolved. When she called into the Today Show from her living room, her voice trembling with a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration, she wasn't delivering a news report or an interview. She was delivering her own truth. "I have a daughter," she told her colleagues and millions of listeners. In that singular moment, the psychological double life that had defined her adulthood came to an end. The release was profound. For the first time, the woman the world saw was the exact same woman holding a baby in a quiet apartment. The response was an overwhelming, global wave of love, proving that the vulnerability she had feared was actually her greatest bridge to the audience. However, the end of The Secret marked the beginning of a complex new reality. This chapter explores the grueling logistical and emotional challenges of starting over in your 50s. Balancing the demands of a high-pressure, international morning show with the reality of late-night feedings and diaper changes required a complete dismantling of her old life. The disciplined, career-centric routine she had honed over decades had to be razed to the ground to make room for a small, dependent human being. We examine the psychological shift in how Hoda viewed success. The Emmys, the ratings, and the professional accolades that once provided her sense of worth suddenly felt secondary to the simple, profound act of being present for a first smile or a quiet nap. Hoda's evolution during this period was remarkable. She transitioned from a woman who lived in constant fear of being found out, of her cancer, her loneliness, or her unconventional dreams, to a woman who found an unbreakable strength in her own vulnerability. She realized that by showing the world her struggles and her late-blooming joy, she wasn't just telling her story. She was giving permission to millions of others to pursue their own impossible dreams. The mask of the morning star hadn't been destroyed. It had been replaced by something far more authentic. But as her personal life finally came into focus, a new professional storm was brewing. The landscape of NBC News was about to be rocked by a massive internal shift, and a major seat at the most powerful table in television had suddenly opened up. Hoda had found her voice as a mother, but was she ready to step into the void and lead one of the world's most iconic news programs through its darkest hour? In early 2018, Hoda Kotb made history. Following the sudden and high-profile departure of Matt Lauer amidst a wave of industry-shaking scandal, NBC turned to the woman who had spent 30 years in the wings. For the first time in the program's 66-year history, the Today Show would be led by an all-female anchor team. This wasn't just a win for gender equality. It was a psychological turning point for a network in desperate need of healing. This chapter explores how Hoda's decades of waiting and her private journey through cancer and motherhood had actually been her greatest training ground. She was no longer just a happy co-host. She was a leader whose authority was rooted in genuine human experience rather than a manufactured persona. Her psychological evolution, the transition from a person who suppressed her deepest fears to one who led with radical empathy, became the show's greatest asset. At a time when viewers felt betrayed by the institutions they trusted, Hoda offered something rare, a singular, authentic existence. The double life was finally gone. Whether she was reporting on national tragedy or celebrating the addition of her second daughter, Hope Catherine, the woman on the screen was the same woman living her life off camera. We see her navigating the complexities of public breakups and the challenges of older parenthood with a grace that only comes from having survived the fire of private struggle. This chapter reflects on the irony of her journey. The 30 years she spent hiding her longing and her pain hadn't been wasted. They had prepared her for the immense responsibility of being the true Hoda. She had become a trusted news figure not because she was perfect, but because she was real. She had reached the absolute pinnacle of her career, holding a seat of power that most journalists only dream of, and she was doing it while raising the daughter she once thought she'd never have. By all accounts, she had finally achieved the perfect life. Yet, as she sat at the peak of her professional influence, Hoda began to feel a familiar, quiet tug at her heart. She had spent a lifetime climbing the mountain and another decade proving she belonged at the top. But with her personal life finally in focus, she began to realize that the view from the anchor desk wasn't the only one that mattered. In a move that stunned the industry and her millions of fans, Hoda prepared to make a decision that no one saw coming. After fighting so hard to get here, why would she choose to walk away now? In late 2024, Hoda Kotb stood before her audience and delivered a message that felt like both a shock and a profound realization of her destiny. She announced her decision to step away from the Today Show, the very platform that had been her home, her identity, and her sanctuary for nearly 3 decades. This final chapter serves as the resolution to a 30-year journey of self-discovery. We reflect on the incredible transformation of a woman who once measured her worth by the red light of the television camera, but who now finds her greatest validation in the quiet, unscripted moments at home. The psychological arc is finally complete. Hoda no longer needs the mask of the morning star because she has found an immovable peace in her own truth. The double life she lived for so long was not, in the end, a period of deception. Instead, it was a long, necessary season of growth and preparation. Every year spent in the wings, every silent tear shed over an empty room, and every fear kept under lock and key served a purpose. They built the emotional intelligence and the resilience she needed to not only survive the heights of fame, but to eventually outgrow them. Hoda's story teaches us a powerful lesson in human evolution. It is never too late to reinvent ourselves, and our secrets do not define us. Only our courage to eventually share them does. She proved that the perfect timing isn't dictated by society, but by the heart's readiness to be seen. As she prepares for a future where her primary title is simply mom, the role she waited 3 decades to play, Hoda exits the stage not with regret, but with a sense of immense gratitude. She's choosing the life she once thought was impossible over the career she worked a lifetime to achieve. As she closes this chapter of her professional life, she leaves us with a final, lingering reflection. If you're sitting in your own empty room, waiting for your life to truly begin, are you brave enough to step out of the shadows? Are you brave enough to finally ask for what you really want?